Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to class. to what in fact will be our second last study or session with the contemplating reality. I think it would be a bit much to press the entire remainder into this class, so I hope that's all right with everyone. We'll be doing one more time next Thursday. I gather from the responses that's all right. And then also, I think, let's see how we go, but we could very easily have a little bit relaxed the last time. So prepare questions and so on. And also, there was one of you who sent me a mail with some questions that I haven't answered yet. But other than that, then welcome and kindly with the insight, or with the when we're studying this, it's obviously not for information. It's really just to clarify the basis of what we do on the Buddhist path. We are critical of a condition in our mind which is fixating on something which actually doesn't exist, but for that reason we suffer. And so we need to uproot these certain assumptions. It's not like we're instilling a new belief, but we're more taking a hard look at our assumptions and identifying how this is relevant not just for ourselves but for all suffering sentient beings. Then our motivation really goes beyond just this being a study for ourselves or something Buddhist or something isolated in some way. This is really intended to get to the heart of the matter. So this preparation with this larger vision is what we call preparing with bodhicitta. So so in our study, we first pay homage then. I pay homage to the ocean of Dharma, I pay homage to the ocean of ethics, I pay homage to the ocean of qualities, and the oceans of compassionate ones who open the Dharma gate. Brief summary, I don't know how brief it is anymore, but anyway, we've looked at the problem here. This is really key in approaching the whole thing, our delusion, the imputing something existent that doesn't have existence. And so understanding the various ways that this is addressed in the Buddhist teaching through the 3 turnings of the wheel and the 4 tenets. Then we've looked at the way of contemplating, what it means, selflessness, what that means in terms of both our experience of happiness and suffering. And we've gone through the Vibhashika, analytical approach of the external phenomena, the Sautrantika, understanding of how we subjectively project onto phenomena and fail to see their value through our projection or their reality through our projection. And then we've looked at the Mahayana, and particularly then the 2 schools that really figure in the Mahayana are what we call the Yogacarya, which assert a certain existence of something, and then we have the Madhyamika that really tries to expose the flaw in asserting any reality onto phenomena. So that's pretty much where we're at right now. And then within the Madhyamika context, we're presently looking at this analysis that we have from Chandrakirti. Now, what Chandrakirti says, and what's the basis for this, is that samsara originates with a mistake. And so he says, seeing that all faults and afflictions without exception arise from the view of the transitory collection, and understanding that the object of that view is the self, yogis refute the self. So we could see how each of the 5 skandhas, they can be seen in terms of various ways of attributing identity, either as different from the self being different from them, or the same, and so forth. So in this way, we have four ways of that we can construct a self on the basis of the skandhas. But what is important is that we, of course, experience a mere self, a naturally existing, what we then could say a conventionally existent self, which is then on the basis of just saying, well, the Buddha said I, we will just say I, anybody will say I, but there's a place where it attains a toxic quality. And that's what we would identify if, for example, somebody insults us. Then we're doing more than just having a self. Then there's a self-centering, a fragile ego. So we have more than a self, we have this ego. And actually last time somebody in class, and I was a little bit guilty of not properly appreciating what was being said, was a very good comment. And that is that this mere I, and we could say, let's say here in the last two lines, actually I was looking at a text where it identifies the first self on the basis of the transitory collection, the skandhas and so forth. Yeah, we say self, right? It's fairly innocent, really, saying self, Who done it? Well, I did it. Or whose car is this? It's my car. We operate with self in a fairly harmless way. But okay, so that is what we could refer to as relative existence. And so someone was saying the mere I imputed on transitory collection is empty. So that's fair enough. But that kind of I, even though it's empty, it doesn't have intrinsic existence ultimately. Relatively, this I is then the one that says, I'm going for a walk, and so forth. It functions. Then you have the idea of inherent I, the big deal, me, ego. And that's a mistaken notion. And that actually doesn't have any relative existence. So where we could say the functioning ego is like the rabbit's ears, then to assume that there's some horns there, that's being diluted. There's nothing conventionally existent. So we want to say that the self, that is the view of the transitory collection and so forth, that's imputed on my body, my feelings, all of that. Sure, you'll ask the Dalai Lama, do you like your new watch? He'll say, yeah, I love my new watch, and so forth. So there will be the ordinary mere self that's associated with the skandhas, but then there's the Dalai Lama, for example, he'll be going to some teaching, and then there'll be some of these people that oppose him outside. Yeah, it's sort of a thing that's generally been exposed as being really funded by external parties. But anyway, you'll have these people who are against the Dalai Lama, and the Dalai Lama will be chuckling and says, "Oh, my brothers and sisters not very happy with me," or something like that, right? So that's where the sage is not terribly afflicted. If someone like me, there would be a group of people saying something negative about me, I'd be sort of seriously, offended and so forth. So that's where we can identify this, which then needs to be refuted. So that's where we say yogis refute the self. Yeah. So that's so important. So we have this where it says the Vajrayana realization of selflessness destroys the apprehension of self, and at the same time, the 20 lofty peaks of the mountainous view of the transitory collection are completely destroyed as well. So that's where we talk about the non-existent self that is destroyed. Now we use this image of okay, so we have this, let's see here. Then we're now going into the sevenfold analysis, where when we talk about the 20 lofty peaks, then we talk about where we say the phenomena that we are the phenomena, like we say this body is me, or whatever it might be, whatever aspects of our being, we say that is me. Yeah, the I am. And then there's the other one that is I have, and that's again saying my body, my feelings and so forth. Then there's the sense that we are supported by the body. I exist based on the body, so my body kind of represents me. And then there's a sense that the body is supported by us. So then we would say, my hand and so forth. So that's where there's the connection that the body is supported by us. So we have these 4 ways of applying to the 5 skandhas, and that then makes the 20 views. Now, in the following, then Chandrakirti wants to dismantle the idea of the non-existent self. And so he adds 3 aspects that we might assume form the basis for a self, which is then what he includes in this 7-fold analysis. The self, in this case, then we're going to look at the automobile as something different from its parts. The self of the automobile is the mere collection of the parts, and then the self of the automobile is the shape of the parts. Okay? So, next time you go to IKEA, you'll see that here you can get yourself a new car, and they'll give you a little Allen key, and you can take home, and you can assemble this. But here we actually have, this is of course a bit sort of, this is a bit more complex than the good old cart, presumably, that Chandrakirti was. And so to just not be completely overwhelmed by the intensity of this array, then I'm also going to operate with a more simple cart, which is the Fred Flintstone car. So there we have sort of the chassis here, the wheels, the steering wheel, the seats, the cabin, windows, and so forth in a more manageable format. But anyway, we look at these parts and we might say, the parts are the car. Yeah, these parts are the car. And that's kind of where we actually could look at these various parts and say, are any of these parts the car? Not really. Yeah. So we look at all of that and we kind of think it's simple, but we're implying that the existence of car in the parts, or the identity of the parts being the car. Clearly not the case. So then we could say the car possesses the parts, thinking these are the car's parts. So when we say these parts, my skandhas, my body, and so on, but it's not as if any of these parts in and of themselves have some allegiance to the car as such. The parts, in this case, the wheels here and so forth, all of these, the chassis, whatever, none of these parts in and of themselves think they are the car, or have that they are intrinsically the car. That's maybe this can help looking back at any of these parts, right? None of these little bits intrinsically are belonging, or how do you say that they are, that the car somehow possesses these. So then we could say the car exists as supported by the parts, thinking the car is made of these parts. Now, all of this is completely fine if it wasn't that we turn it into something absolute. And so if we want to take this apart, then in each of these parts, again, there's no allegiance to the greater whole of the car. So also again, if I say, here I am, then yes, here I am, and I show my hand, but the hand in and of itself is not Jakob. And so the parts, not in and of themselves, the car doesn't exist on the basis of the parts themselves. And similarly, also the parts are supported by the car. Then we the whole thing of the car is not made up of the parts. There's similarly also the car parts themselves, um, the alternator and so forth. All of that might have a role in the car, but again, we take one part of this array of car parts out there, and again, there's none of them that intrinsically is the car. So then we might think, well, there's something greater, like in me. There's my higher being that's apart from my, there's something greater than me, apart from the parts. We won't find that. Also, if we have the mere collection of all these parts, again, all of the things are there, all of these parts are there, then just the collection of it, again, coming back to the idea of IKEA selling you a car like that, you go home and after you've been sitting there with your Allen key for a few hours, you can definitely say that your idea that this was the car when you were sitting there with all these parts clearly is not the car. And then Chandrakirti has this interesting logic also where he says, well, you might say it's the shape. There we have it, all unified as one big whole, right? So then, in that case, if we take the car apart, then the shape is no longer there. But then, if everything assembled was the car, and it's defined by its shapes, then the parts themselves, their shapes should have changed. They should equally have changed also when we take them apart. So of course this is the kind of mind-bending logic, but at the same time, if we read it and reflect on it, we can actually slowly let it seep in that our assumption around some inherent existence, either in the whole or in the parts, is a flawed assumption. Again, this is also where we could apply this logic, where we say it's neither one nor many. So in the case of there being a car, clearly it's not one, but also each of these little entities here are not the car. So that's the sevenfold analysis, and it really is in Andy Karr's presentation. It is presented as a contemplation. So I don't think it's something where it's sort of we just click with it. Or otherwise, what I think is helpful is just to read through it and to let it sink in. But the point really that we're making is obviously the attribution of some higher, unchanging unity or identity on the basis of what is in fact a construct. That's the flawed assumption. I was looking at Tongtse Rinpoche's comments on this analysis, and I uploaded to the reading folder a section of Rinpoche's teachings on this when he was teaching this in Canada. This is actually not part of the published, well, it is something that we published years ago, but it's never sort of been distributed. But this is slightly different from the one that you have with the Madhyamaka teachings, but the theme is the same. And in there, Rinpoche, at one point, he says, what we're doing here with the Madhyamaka deconstruction, right? Rinpoche says, Madhyamaka itself, for conventional purposes, only accepts a mere self, mere phenomena. And what is this mere phenomenon? It has not arisen from self, from both, from other, or from neither. What is this Madhyamaka mere self? It is not the same as the five aggregates. It's not different. It's not possessed there or here. Mere self and mere phenomena have dependently arisen. That is all, dependent arising, not arising from here or there, meaning from self or other. So the objective with Madhyamaka deconstruction is really just to see the dependent arising and the lack of inherent self. Okay. 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 It is clear to me how we take the self of our own identity to be truly existent. However, it's not clear to me how we, as modern Western rationalists, take external phenomena to possess some inherent true existence. It seems to me that modern consumer society, where everything is disposable, involves a recognition that everything changing, nothing lasts, and that nothing has actual identity. I'd really like to hear more from you about the ways in which we regard external phenomena as possessing true existence. Well, this is where the Buddhist project is very much about not just an ontological assessment, because there, yes, we can agree that, yes, we definitely acknowledge that things are changing. We can also acknowledge that things are constructs. But in the Buddhist analysis, we go a bit further, or not further, but we humbly acknowledge that we attribute some some reality to things. For example, my car gets scratched. Now, that's just that my car gets scratched. It actually works beautifully still. But there's a place where I have an irritation about my car getting scratched. And so I'm operating with this sense that my car is diminished. Actually, all that's happened is really somebody just drew something with some, car key or whatever, and then all of a sudden the sense of its attributed value has been diminished, and this also operates on all our likes and dislikes. So that's where we're very much onto how we, on the subjective, individual level, we attribute some reality to phenomena that forms the basis for like and dislike. See, when we're taking the ontological discussion in Western philosophy of science, we're really just talking about things as they exist in themselves. That's so-called the project of objectivist phenomena. But we're kind of ignoring the fact that our suffering comes then, my suffering with the scratched car, or my suffering with not getting exactly what I want, or my attachment to something that I like. All of that drives a circle of self-centering, of me and my object, and that in turn then the emotions and the afflictions, and then again drives patterns that essentially are self-serving and so forth. So that's where there's a toxic dimension that comes into this, and this is what we just want to expose. That, and in a way, there's nothing absolutely surprising in this, but it's more that we operate with a practice of ignoring this, and that's a very important point. That's really what the Madhyamika project is about. It's not that really there are any sort of immense surprises that come in, but at the same time, when we talk about this non-rising, that's where we want to identify that we want to humbly identify that we are attributing some solidity to phenomena, irrationally, if you like, that they don't exist, and on the basis of this, we have all sorts of um, labelings that involve like, dislike, and so forth. So that's where there's nothing surprising about saying that phenomena are mere arising, a mere self, mere phenomena. But it's the subjective way that we engage with it. So that's also why Madhyamika would always agree with anything science would say. Wouldn't really disagree, but they would at the same time be very keen on bringing in the how do we relate to it as individuals and our subjective perception. That's continually a thing we come back to, right? I hope that makes sense. But that's an important point, really. Let's just see. Did that make sense? Okay. Another question. Dependent arising as an argument about existence seems to have a different characteristic flavor than the other arguments. The other arguments seem to negate any existence at all, one or many, cause equal to result, the end result is non-existence. But dependent arising acknowledges appearances having a certain reality, just not absolute reality. It seems that this doesn't seem to be emphasized much, which I find confusing. Well, actually it is, because you'll remember that the first four, when we had these reasonings, the Madhyamika reasonings, the first four, they're intended on undermining the inherent existence again, nothing surprising in it, but bringing out this fact that nothing has actually come into existence. And in this way, it's intended to eliminate our fixating on phenomena as having some true existence. That's the main thing, because that's really what we get stuck on. We feel things are real. But then again, there's a problem where we then would just say, well, then things are ultimately empty. And this is something that that we're dealing a lot with in today's discussion. Then we'll just end up saying, well, there's nothing. And that's not the case either. So dependent arising is such a is such an important point, because it actually balances what we say, the harmony between emptiness and dependent arising. So and this is something we'll be looking at repeatedly, is this balancing the lack of inherent existence and yet the appearance. So I hope that makes sense. But we definitely have then a distinguishing between the first four, aiming at what we call eliminating eternalism, and then the last one, which aims at eliminating nihilism. Okay. Now we're on to something called Shinto Madhyamika. And it's implicit what we're doing here is that we'd like to arrive at a place where we're no longer deluded, where we're seeing clearly, where we see without confusion. And that's where the Shinto Madhyamika, they go a bit further than just the deconstruction and just seeing the emptiness and dependent arising. They're actually then, they speak about a condition of wisdom that is not just seeing seeing through the delusion, but also seeing that within this absence of delusion there is a luminous quality. And that's the teachings on Buddha nature, which is then, Andrew Karr says, after the Buddha taught the essencelessness of phenomena in the second turning of the wheel, he taught the Tathagata or Buddha nature in the third turning. Tathagata means that all sentient beings, from the smallest insect to the most realized human being, have this wisdom nature and have had this nature from beginningless time. Therefore, the purpose of the path is to reveal Buddhahood, not create it. So that's the premise of the path. We're curable, we're innately healthy. Sentient beings, the patients, are innately Buddhas, they're innately healthy. And once we've broken through this confusion of the assumptions about inherent existence, then the final turning of the wheel teaches Buddha nature. So we've looked at these four tenets, we call them, philosophical approaches or schools, the Vibhashika, Sutrantika, Yogacarya, or Chittamatra, and Madhyamika. But we also initially talked about these three teachings, these three turnings of the wheel, that are then the first turning of the wheel, which is really just more about identifying the central role of the mind. The second turning of the wheel, which is understanding the lack of inherent existence, which is very much the Madhyamika in general. And then the third turning of the wheel is still based on the understanding of emptiness as the lack of that there's nothing we can ultimately objectify. There's nothing that ultimately inherently exists. And so that's the basis, of course. But also within that, there's a cognitive quality of non-confusion that is luminosity, that is the basis for all appearances, if you like. And that's the subject of Buddha nature, or what we call the final turning of the wheel. Now, what we're doing with the entire path then, which is unveiling this Buddha nature, is understanding that this enlightened condition is not something that's created. It's something that we discover. So, yeah. So the third turning shows how the undiluted cognition of wisdom is basic to our being. So examples of this show then how the and we have these three examples, which is the sun is unstained by passing clouds. So similarly, also Buddha nature is unstained by our confusion. So we and also the butter is contained in milk, but not manifest, just as wisdom is not contained in the mind until it's churned by the path. So our nature, of course, is intrinsically Buddha, but with the present condition, this awakening hasn't become manifest. So that's one way of seeing it. And also we talk about gold is hidden in ore until the ore has been refined, just as wisdom is hidden in the mind until refined by the path. Now we can see this in different ways. One is that the path purifies or brings it out, but we also sometimes describe it as all the qualities are spontaneously there. But the bottom line really is that this nature is not external to us. Now, the second turning where the Buddha teaches phenomena as lacking inherent existence is what we call nitartha, which is also which is then what we call a certain truth. Sort of like we could say that's final. We can have a lot of teachings that are sort of intending on getting us to a place of seeing reality, and that's what we call it, yetartha, or expedient means. For example, you could say practicing meditation is expedient means. It's not an end in itself, but it's about arriving at a place where realization or clear seeing can take place. The accumulating of good karma. The entire practice of the path, we could say, is expedient means, because innately we are Buddhas. But then again, there's a very palpable confusion that we can't ignore. But what we're looking at here is how are things actually. And so that's where we refer to this teaching as nitartha. And that's where the second turning is exposing or showing or demonstrating how phenomena intrinsically cannot be objectified. They don't possess inherent existence. They have the nature of emptiness. Now, emptiness does not mean nothing. It just means emptiness, empty-like. And so the implication is that phenomena, they are equally manifest or appearing, but we need to understand they cannot be grasped, and that's the emptiness aspect. Third turning, which is about then the wisdom that's not deluded, is also nitartha, and that's the teaching then the wisdom that is no longer the abiding condition of our mind, which is no longer confused. That's wisdom. So settling into freedom from conceptual contrivance or conceptual construction may be obscured by the analytical emphasis of the second turning. So we would say when we're meditating, to know that phenomena don't possess inherent existence, we might continually going back to an analytical component. And sometimes this is taught, that you need to have that analytical component. And that, of course, is true in terms of us becoming familiar to this on this, but it is agitating the mind, and it is ultimately still, you could say, intellectual activity. So that's where Buddha nature and having confidence in this nature enables us to settle. So that's where we could say, without understanding Buddha nature, there might be a subtle tendency towards analysis which obscures. Confidence in Buddha nature is the antidote for such. So analytical meditation is very helpful, but ultimately we need to engage in what's called settling meditation. That is not intellectual, at the same time doing settling meditation without a view and without a certainty about the nature of phenomena and so forth, without a view, could be could also be something very dull. So just sitting down and saying I am primordial Buddha and so forth wouldn't lead very far. So in progressive stages of meditation on emptiness, then Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso, he says, the purpose of teaching the Tathagata is to give the meditator confidence that he or she already has Buddha nature. Without such confidence, it is very difficult to fully rest the mind free from all conceptual contrivance, because there is always a subtle tendency to try to remove or achieve something. So we have this famous quote from the Hevajra Tantra, which is saying that all sentient beings are Buddhas with stains. So in the Hevajra Tantra, then the point is that we are primordially Buddhas, except we are temporarily stained, and once these stains are removed, then our Buddha nature becomes manifest. So we would say sentient beings, they possess the natural abiding purity, but Buddhas then possess an additional purity, which is then having removed these temporary stains. So we have a very important work then, which highlights this phenomenon that we can call Buddha nature, Sugata Garbha or Tathagata Garbha, and this is the Mahayana Uttara Tantra Shastra. And in there, then Andy, he quotes then some lines from there regarding this abiding condition that is always there regardless. We say this abiding condition is not improved in nirvana, and it's not diminished in samsara. It abides as the core, like we saw before, of all sentient beings. Just like the sun behind the clouds, like the butter in the milk, and like the gold ore within, ore. So unrefined ore. So, sorry. If an inexhaustible treasure were buried in the ground beneath a poor man's house, the man would not know it, and the treasure would not speak to him and tell him, I am here. Likewise, a precious treasure is contained in each being's mind. This is its true state, which is free from defilement. Nothing is to be added and nothing to be removed. Nevertheless, since they, i.e. sentient beings, do not realize this, sentient beings continuously undergo the manifold sufferings of deprivation. So we wander, we could say unnecessarily, in samsara. Okay. Resting the mind free from, so there's a question here. Resting the mind free from all conceptual contrivance. So concepts may still arise while the mind is at rest. Yes, but the thing is, we don't fixate on the arisings. So I think we mentioned last time this instruction from Tilopa, where he says to his student Naropa, you're not contrived from the object. You're not bound by the object. You're bound by your fixation. Cut the fixation. So that's the quintessential meditation instruction. And of course, that needs really to be understood in the context of larger explanation, I think, for most of us. And that's what we're offering here. So, and also in the Uttara Tantra, we find, yes, there are three reasons why sentient beings have Buddha nature. There are 10 points that explain its qualities, and there's 9 metaphors. The way sentient beings' minds are, by nature wisdom, while temporarily being obscured by defilements. And we're going to look at the 3, we're going to look at the 10. I'm not sure, is there really the 9 in here? I don't think so. Maybe I'm wrong. Did you guys find the 9? Well, you know, these 9, they are the example of the treasure that's buried under the poor man's hovel. We would say it's like a statue that's lying in the mud. It's like a statue that's hidden in a mold. It's like honey in a beehive. All of these 9 metaphors are just ways of explaining how this nature is unconditionally present while being temporarily obscured. But anyway, that's for first of all, the 3 reasons why all sentient beings have Buddha nature. So then in the Uttara Tantra Shastra, it says, the perfect Buddhakaya is all-embracing. Suchness cannot be differentiated, and all beings have the disposition. Thus they always have Buddha nature. So this is the nature of reality as it is. That's the ground. The Buddha has said that all beings have Buddha nature. Since Buddha wisdom is always present within the assembly of beings, since this undefiled nature is free from duality, and since the disposition from Buddhahood has been named after its fruit. If the Buddha element were not present, there would be no remorse over suffering, there would be no longing for nirvana, no striving, and devotion towards this aim. So, as for the first then, 10 points. No, this is 3 points. What is this? Sorry, I apologize for. Oh yeah. Okay, so yes, so these are the three reasons. Huh? So the first one is that this is the ground. The first one, okay, the ground is the ground of beings is primordially enlightened. Otherwise, enlightenment would not be embracing the ground as it is. So the suchness of enlightenment is not different from the ground. So that's the what is it again? The reasons why sentient beings have Buddha nature. Then we would say the second one is that all beings have Buddha nature, since the Buddha wisdom is always present within the assembly of beings. It is free from duality, and so the awakening of this nature that is primordially there is referred to as Buddhahood or awakening. So we name it after the fruition, in the sense that the Tathagata is there as a potential, but we name this nature after its qualities. And then the last one, the first ones, I have to say, I find a little bit sort of slightly circular in their proposition, but so be it. I think it's fair enough. It's just saying the nature of things. But the last one is, I think, particularly interesting, because we're saying if the Buddha element were not present, there would be no remorse over suffering. That's actually a really important point. We wouldn't be frustrated with suffering if that was natural. And that kind of also explains the above two, in that is the ground. The Buddha nature is the ground. And so suffering, if you like, is not natural. And the wishing for nirvana wouldn't be there if there wasn't any abiding Buddha nature. All right, then we're looking at some of the, that should say 1 of 10, I believe. Yeah, sorry. Anyway, so the expansiveness of Buddha wisdom, just as space, and this is again quoting, I think, from the Uttara Tantra, just as space, which is by nature free from thought, pervades everything, the undefiled expanse, which is the nature, is all-pervading. So that's the expansiveness of Buddha nature. And Karr says, when we are released from the temporary defilements of concepts and kleshas, we discover the undefiled expanse. So I'm a little bit tempted to quote from the Dzogchen tradition. Sri Singha who then said, sentient beings' minds abide in fragments, whereas the Buddhas abide like space. And we could say what we do as sentient beings is that we have tunnel vision that fixates on a very narrow place, which is ourselves and the way that we perceive phenomena. So that's how we narrow down through the defilements of the concepts and the kleshas. In the absence of that, we discover something vast. And that's also, we speak about vipassana, right? The stains are adventitious. So there we have a curable condition. Having faults that are adventitious and qualities that are its nature, it is afterwards the same as before. This is Dhammata, ever unchanging. So the qualities there have always been there, they always remain, they are the nature. And in removing these adventitious faults, then we realize the unchanging nature. Dhammata means things in themselves, Dhamma phenomena as they are in their purity. So Karr says, this counteracts our usual understanding that we are made up of stains, that they are basic to our makeup. Instead, what is basic is wisdom, which needs no transformation. It merely needs to be released from temporary conditions. Again, we're back and forth between this, the reality of who we are, but then also the actual experience presently of our confused condition. But that's where very often when we're confused and so forth, we think that is what constitutes what we are, and that's not the case. So if we go to the Dalai Lama and we say to him, I'm terribly confused, the Dalai Lama would say, yes, but it's okay. It's curable. So that's the message of the Buddha, if you like, the gospel of the Buddha, is that our confusion is not basic to what we are. In fact, what is basic to what we are is this wisdom. The source of all the obscuration is incorrect or mistaken thought. So mistaken thought here is more than just a thought. It's basic delusion. But the verses from the Uttara Shastra says then, this clear and luminous nature of mind is as changeless as space. It is not afflicted by desire and so on. The adventitious stains which are sprung from incorrect thoughts. So Andy says the way the obscurations are removed is by transforming our thinking. This allows the clear and luminous nature of mind to shine forth. Now, thinking here is referring to the entire transformation of our being in terms of arriving at the vipassana, or the wider perspective that no longer is obscured in terms of duality, in terms of the afflicted conditions of the mind and so forth. So it's a bit more than thinking, but yes, we sometimes in the teachings it will just refer to tokpa, or thoughts, just as in terms of encapsulating the whole condition of confusion. So with the absence of that, the removing of that, the luminous nature shines forth. So this nature is not conceptual. Being subtle, it is not an object for study. Being absolute, it cannot be reflected upon. Dhammata, meaning the nature reality, is deep. Hence, it is not an object for any worldly meditation, and so on. So this nature is not something that falls into the ordinary parameters of how we think and how we do things. Like it says, particularly how we think of things and experience things. In the wisdom chapter of the Way of the Bodhisattva, Shantideva says the absolute is not the scope of the intellect, and so this is something that goes beyond the ordinary thinking or the ordinary conceptual mind. So, and the Karr says, to show how profound Buddha nature is, the Uttara Tantra explains that it cannot be experienced through study. It cannot be experienced through contemplation, and it cannot be experienced through conventional meditation, since all of these involve conceptuality. The only way to experience the wisdom mind is to let the mind rest in its own nature. So, of course, in the course of the path, the way that we practice shamatha and the way that we train the mind and so forth, that's all very important. But when it comes to leaving the mind in its naked condition, what we call resting in the nature of mind, we have to understand this is something subtle. If it wasn't subtle, then anybody could just, you could just get that in, together with your high school diploma, or, somebody could just, if you're interested, oh yeah, that's how it is. But clearly that's not the case. We have to work through our conceptual deception and also then realize something. And so clearly just studying some textbooks is not going to make us enlightened. There's more to it than that. And Karr says that the nature of mind is not mere emptiness, but luminosity and emptiness inseparable is the distinguishing feature of this final middle way school, the Shentong Madhyamika, or empty of other middle way. Luminosity emptiness is sometimes referred to as emptiness endowed with the supreme of all characteristics. It is emptiness endowed with the wisdoms and Buddha qualities. So within the lack of inherent existence of all phenomena, there is a shining, undiluted quality of, you could say, cognitive capacity. And this is what we then refer to as luminosity. This is what we hear about as the clear light. When you have people saying, when you die, you should meet the clear light. And there's sort of a little bit of a, how do you say, popular sort of rather simplistic way of presenting some of these things. But of course, they actually have some foundation in something very deep. But the luminosity, again, this nature is not something that's just simply realized as such. It really refers to the undiluted condition of wisdom. But in there, reality is then not just a lacking of anything or an absence. And we would say, from that point of view, then emptiness is really just a conventional way of introducing this. What we are looking at is this luminous quality. We'll look at more of that. So this Shentongpa, Shen means empty of other. So Shentongpa, like all Madhyamikas, agree that the genuine reality is empty of conceptual fabrications. But they go on to assert that genuine reality is not empty of non-dual wisdom. So this is where, he says that, and he goes on to say, this is what the term Shentong, or empty of other, actually mean. Genuine reality is empty of conceptual fabrications, which are incidental or other, but it is not empty of the wisdom that is its nature. So here we're not left with what sometimes is referred to as a non-affirmative negation, just saying it's all empty. And I was like, But we're rather saying it's empty of confusion, but it's not empty of wisdom. So the Shentongpas are sometimes a little bit criticized for saying, but then you're saying there's something that's real, aren't you? Well, yeah, we could say there's a genuine reality, but then again, it's not graspable by the conceptual mind, so there's no flaw in that. But that is then what we call empty of other. When we have this notion of saying there's nothing empty, that's then we call that rantong, or empty of self, meaning that there's nothing that can be grasped. And that's true too. From the conventional point of view, there's nothing that can be grasped. But from the wisdom's point of view, then there is something that is genuine. So we're now going to look, so since we're saying there's something that is real, then we are going back actually and revisiting these three natures that we saw in the context of the Chittamatrans. A question just arrived. Let's take them as they come in. How is the nature of mind as presented by Shentong different from non-dual consciousness that is presented by Chittamatra as a thoroughly established nature? Because that is also empty of duality and ungraspable. Well, at this point I should say I'm so glad you asked, because we're going to answer that now. Hopefully it will answer your question. So as far as, like you were saying, both say that genuine reality is the perfectly existent nature. However, Chitramatans say that the perfectly existent nature is the dependent nature, free from the imaginary nature. So they say this pure dependent nature is consciousness. So we remove the imaginary dualistic mind, and then that this consciousness that's there, that is the that's the perfectly existent nature. Shentonpas here, and remember, they're middleway people. They don't assert a reality to anything, and so also the dependent nature, they don't actually assert reality to that. But we'll look at this now. Shentonpas say that the perfectly existent nature is not consciousness, but wisdom that is free from both the dependent nature and the imaginary nature. So we're going to a little bit dwell on this. And so Jamgon Kongtrul, just to have a classical quote, he says, the imaginary and dependent aspects are apparent reality. The perfectly existent nature, self-aware original wisdom, is genuine. This is the empty of other presentation. So remember, what we have with the empty of other presentation is that we're asserting something. There's a happy ending to this. You might have worried, gosh, all this deconstruction, I'm going to be left with nothing. But there is actually, from the Shentong point of view, there is the asserting of wisdom. Then again, we're not saying it's simple either, but there's a happy ending. I hope you see it that way. So we're revisiting this model that we had from before, and there the dependent nature, you could say the whole experience of mind, right? Yes, that's definitely there, and that's relatively existent as mind. So the imaginary nature is then something that just is a non-existent figment. We're attributing some sort of reality to something that actually is just a figment of the mind. And so both of these actually are defined as aspects of the confused mind. But the perfectly existent nature, innate wisdom, abides in no way limited to any of that. So with the path, when we're uncovering the path, then there's a complete freedom from mind. There's a complete freedom from the mind. If you come across the teaching of the Great Perfection, Dzogchen, they'll be very clear. Actually, what we're doing is distinguishing between mind and wisdom. And so mind is what holds us back in the condition of samsara, the being caught on the appearances, and wisdom is the unchanging nature that is forever unconditioned by any aspects of this mind. But in terms of these two aspects of mind, one we would say has a relative existence, a bit like we would say the mere self, the rabbit's ears, and the other one is the imaginary nature, which is non-existent. It is like the rabbit's horns. So Jamgon Kongtrul, he says, the imagined nature is non-existent. The dependent nature exists conventionally. The consummate does not exist conventionally, but it does so ultimately. So again, wisdom is in no way tangled up with conventional reality. It abides at all times. It's a very reassuring phenomenon, actually, that it's always exists purely. We also give this image. It's like Mercury. Mercury, you can put it in dust and it's untainted by or unmixed with the mercury. So then he draws on this dream that we might have, having watched The Wizard of Oz. Then we might have a dream of Dorothy and the Tin Man, or what is it again? The Tin Woodman? Tin Man, I think we just refer to him as, right? So that in there's no existence of Dorothy and the Tin Man, but at the same time, so the existence of them as real is an imaginary, you know. We get excited. Oh, there's Dorothy, there's the Tin Man, but actually, there's no reality to it. But yes, in the dream we are perceiving them. So that's the dependent nature. That's the mere appearance. The inherent existence of them is an imaginary nature. But the appearance, yes, the perception of Dream Dorothy and Tin Man, sure, that has a relative existence. Now, the perfectly existent nature is the ground of the dream, beyond existence and non-existence. So the mind just simply has the capacity to produce phenomena. But this phenomena does not in any way abide in either something that is existent or non-existent. It's not as if at one point then Dorothy and the Tin Man, they would be real, and at a moment then they would go away. They would not be born, and hence they would not die. So we speak about this nature in itself as existing beyond these assertions as of existence and non-existence. Okay, there's a question that came in. From the Dzogchen, is visualizing one's inner guru in Ngundra practice using the imaginary nature of mind? Yes, because on the basis of the dependent nature of the image of the guru, then there's the experience of blessing that could take place. That there is some sense of something profoundly real, and so something genuine and something good. Even though we could say that's just a construct of the mind, it's something that actually breaks the ordinary conceptual mind. So it introduces a dimension of luminosity. So it's not actually using the imaginary nature of mind, which would just be an ordinary dualistic thing. That's now I'm seeing that and it's real, but rather with the devotion and being touched, there's something which opens up beyond that. So we actually use the dependent nature. We could say on the basis of our addiction to imaginary nature, we're using a dependent nature phenomenon, the perception of something external or dualistic, to allow for a process where there is the possibility of having some experience of the perfectly existing nature. So we are using the dependent nature as a skillful means. And why we use that is because we are habituated to imaginary nature, but it actually is using this as a vehicle to break through to something else. From a Dzogchen perspective, is it possible to have a non-dual experience of mind without wisdom? Well, the seeing the non-existence of the dependent nature is wisdom. So we would never have a non-dual experience of mind. The absence of duality is then wisdom. Yeah. Okay. So we have, with regards to these things that we're talking about, we have then three emptinesses. Let's just see here. Yeah, just round it up. Three inherent, what is it again? Three existences. Yeah. So we have three existences, three appearances, right? Aspects. Dorothy as real, Dorothy just as perception, and then the ground. So these are three ways of how phenomena appear. But then, in terms of emptiness, then we would say the emptiness is a non-existent mental phenomenon in that it doesn't even have any conventional role. It's something that we in our delusion attribute solidity or label. Dependent nature is an empty, existent mental phenomenon. So it's something that's empty, and yet it conventionally appears. So we would refer to as existent. And then we would say perfectly existent nature is the ultimate emptiness of mental phenomena, and is the wisdom that is the inseparability of emptiness and luminosity. So the nature itself is the ultimate condition of mental phenomena, which is that it lacks any objective reality, and yet within that absence of any inherent existence, it is this unity of emptiness and awareness, or emptiness and luminosity. So there's three inherent absences that are taking place, which is that Dorothy and Tin Man, they lack any inherent characteristic. The whole drama around them, they're so pretty, they're so this, they're so that, there's all of that. That's actually doesn't exist. And what we have, however, is this appearance. Say they appear, but then again, they lack inherent arising. They haven't actually come about. And that's again they lack inherent arising, right? And so perfectly existent nature is then the ground of the dream, which lacks any conceptual reality. So again, coming back to the ultimate nature, which has nothing about it that has any duality or has any conceptual reality of any kind. So the imaginary nature lacks inherent characteristic, the dependent nature lacks inherent arising, and the dependent nature lacks any conceptual or dualistic reality. So, sorry, this shouldn't have had, let's just see here. I hope you guys don't mind me editing on the spot, but I just think it's less confusing actually if it's done properly. Thank you for your patience. Okay. So Jamgul Cultural, there's a verse in here, and he includes where he says, Jamgul Cultural gives a verse for these that is easy to contemplate. I hope this is not. I hope that the point with these is that when we use them and we go over them, this is seeing things from different angles, and it actually will consolidate a clear understanding. So easy to contemplate. These three characteristics are imputedly existent, substantially existent, and existence without conceptual elaboration, right? So that's the first, the way they exist. Imputedly existent means non-existent, basically, only just labeled, right? Substantially existence is relatively appearing, but hasn't actually hasn't actually arisen. And the existence without conceptual elaborations is then the perfectly existing nature. And then there's the emptiness in the sense of non-existence, the emptiness of the non-existence, the emptiness of the existent, and the ultimate emptiness. And then there are I'll just read it as it says. These three characteristics are imputedly existent, substantially existent, and existence without conceptual elaboration. They are the emptiness of non-existent, the emptiness of the existent, and the ultimate emptiness. They are the inherent absence of characteristics, inherent absence of arising, and the ultimate inherent absence. So this is really just to round it off. So this is inevitably something that we need to revisit. And I think also that's the whole nature of this work, is that we are about contemplation. But at the same time, this is summarizing, I think, in such a concise but very skillful way, these big themes. So, can you just see questions about this? The Prasangika Madhyamika makes no assertions about the nature of true reality. It simply demolishes assertions that others make about it. However, Shinton makes assertions about the nature of true reality, which by definition are not able to be proven or disproven by the conceptual mind. Is it correct to say that these Shentong assertions about true reality are intended as guides to practice, and that we are expected to discover for ourselves the truth or otherwise of these assertions through our own practice? Yes. So the Prasangika Madhyamika, by the way, we could say that both actually, even though Andy doesn't actually formulate like that, so you're right. According to what we're studying, you got it right. But we sometimes would actually say that the Prasangika Madhyamika again had two subsections, because we would say even Shentong is a Prasangika Madhyamika, and so actually Shentong doesn't make any assertions about in terms of the relative phenomena. They would just say we agree with the assertion that we are demolishing assertions about phenomena, but we are still attributing something that lies beyond the ordinary mind. And so the Shentong actually claim to be sort of Madhyamika. I know Andy's saying slightly different, but anyway, you're right. This completely deconstructionist approach is intended to free us from our objective, our sort of the insecurity of the dualistic mind. The whole so that is where we at the time, and also we'll be speaking about this at the time when we are understanding phenomena. Then it's very important that we study this approach, what we here call Prasangika Madhyamika. It is sometimes, this approach is referred to as self-empty, and actually Rangtong, but self-empty approach. But that's so important when we understand reality. But then when we are practicing, then it's quite helpful to have freedom from the analytical mind, and that's where the Shentong approach can be very helpful. So yes, this is then, so you're right, basically you're onto it. Yes, we are expected to then discover this for ourselves. So on the basis of understanding this essentially non-arising, that then paves the way for a place where this wisdom that is beyond concepts and beyond constructs can be introduced. Can a non-existent actually be regarded as emptiness? The Heart Sutra says emptiness is no other than form. So in a non-existent thing, as there is no form, there is no emptiness. Well, I guess that there's not a single phenomena, including the non-existence, that are permeated by emptiness. So I would assume so. Again, I might have students in this class here that have more insight than I have, but I would say just basically sort of just sticking to the premise of our discussion is that all phenomena are permeated by emptiness, including non-existence. Okay. Is Shentong really just Chittamatra that also uses all prasangika arguments? Kind of. But you see again, where the Chittamatra asserts consciousness as ultimately existing, the Shentongpas, they actually are Madhyamikans because they actually don't assert reality to anything. So there is, it's a little bit, it's tricky, and sometimes you see some within the squabbling, the Madhyamika squabbling, they would say, "Oh, you Shentongpas, you're crypto Chittamatrans, hidden, you're sort of a, there's sort of a Trojan Chittamatran buried in this or something, and that's not, the non-dual consciousness is different from wisdom. So that's where we would say there lies a difference there. One is the non-conceptual wisdom, and the other is still attributing solidity to consciousness. So that's how it's explained. So basically the Shentongpas will agree with all that you have in the presentation of the Prasangika. Now we're arriving at a conclusion here, the final intention of the Mahayana, and this is rather sort of where we're rounding it off, which I think is quite helpful in terms of understanding the view. The non-conceptual wisdom that is free from conceptual constructs is the culmination of the Mahayana. So that's essentially what we are doing with everything here. We're arriving at a place where the that which we are understanding is beyond the intellect. It's the wisdom, it's the non-dual wisdom, and it is free from any ordinary conceptual mind. And we looked at it from several angles in a way. So this is, you could say there's quite a healthy logic that's taking place here. But that is then the bridge to the Vajrayana, which is then integrating everything that we perceive in terms of also our bodily existence and our energetic and verbal existence and so forth, integrating all aspects then as the spontaneous presence of enlightenment within our being. So the resultant vehicle means then that the Vajrayana takes this insight into the already abiding condition, the Buddha nature, as then the starting point really for the Vajrayana. The conceptual wisdom that can be approached as freedom from conceptual constructs, as per the non-conceptual wisdom can be approached as a freedom from conceptual constructs, as per the Rangtong Madhyamika. Or, sorry, here then Andy is using the word the Prasangika, the Prasangika Madhyamika. But either way, this is then the approach of what we could call self-empty, and it can also be seen as approached as the abiding, perfectly existing nature as per the Shentong Madhyamika. So here we talked about Prasangika and Shentong. Yeah. So these two, one is saying emptiness, the other is saying the unity of emptiness and luminosity. One is very much on the emphasis on emptiness as per the second turning of the wheel, and the other is the understanding of Buddha nature as per the third turning of the wheel. So we have these two traditions really, and this also sort of sums it up a bit. We have the two traditions. One is Nagarjuna, which is said to come from Manjushri, Nagarjuna's visions of the Bodhisattva Manjushri. And then we have bit down there, we have the tradition of Maitreya and Asanga. So some of you might be familiar with the story of Asanga then encountered Maitreya and received these teachings. So we have the teachings that we have in the Mahayana, very much founded on the Prajnaparamita and Nagarjuna's teachings. And that's where we have then the Svatantrika and Prasangika Madhyamaka, which essentially teach the emptiness or original purity, basically a non-affirmative negation which defies any conceptual reference points. And this is so important, like someone was pointing out, that we initially need to establish this when we are understanding. So that's what we call the view. But then when it comes to our practice, then settling in and having some sense of the non-dual self-aware wisdom is so important when practicing meditating on the nature of mind. And that's then the approach of the Andy says the Chittamatra Yogacharya and the Shentong Madhyamika. So that's one way of understanding it. This is explains little bit different depending, but this works. It's that's what we're talking about. Yeah, something that has this luminosity. Hmm. Now, by the way, this just dawned on me, but there's such a brilliant academic who's been translating some of some really valuable teachings, and I know this is consistent with what Andy and also Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso, Jamgon Mipam, and so on they teach. So I just wanted to highlight, really, if you want, and the thing about the academic here, his name is Karr Brunholz. His way of presenting it is very much as a practitioner, a bit like Andy, and I think they're friends. But Karr Brunholz is exceptional so the foreword here, which is I think is like half of this tome, is something that's very helpful if you want to look deeper into this. It's called Luminous Heart, the third Karma about consciousness, wisdom, and Buddha nature. Again, coming at it from the Kagyu tradition, but also very consistent with what you find in the Dzogchen. So, just some lines then from Jamgon Kongtrul. At the end here, he says, having understood the systems of each of the founders, the two chariots, referring to Nagarjuna and Asanga, if you profoundly comprehend their thought as the same, you will be liberated from the faults of superimposition and denial, and obtain flawless vision of the ultimate view of sutras and tantras. And this is, well, take my word for it, this is so helpful to see the unity of these. When we say superimposition is basically adding or imposing things, which is the view that has a lot to do with what we call eternalism, and denial is then the opposite, saying there's too little or falling into. Sorry, the first is eternalism, attributing some sort of higher substance to phenomena that they don't possess, and then denial is falling into that there's nothing whatsoever. So being free from these faults of superimposition and denial is the scope of the middle way. So if we can see the middle way in terms of there being nothing that can be objectified, there's nothing that has inherent existence, and within that then there is the cognitive capacity of luminosity, then we are able to understand then the very, you can say, deconstructionist language that we find in the sutras, and also how that coincides then with the tantras, which is integrating the phenomena of luminosity. So of course when we have the tantras with the notion of deity, mandala, mantra, and so on, we're not talking about just ordinary phenomena, but we are talking about then the vision of the unity of appearance and emptiness as integrated within all our phenomenal world, seeing as a mandala and so forth. So Vajrayana cannot be actually approached without this understanding of the sutras and the final point of the sutras. So Andy Karr says, passion and enthusiasm can slide into bias and sectarianism. He was saying how it's so important to avoid sectarianism. And he was saying while he was studying this, you sort of get enthusiastic about the Acharya, then you get enthusiastic about the Madhyamika and so on. But he says, this kind of bias and sectarianism, which is not uncommon, these only serve to reinforce ego and cut us off from the sources of realization. Seeing how these traditions complement each other is a great remedy for bias, and that's where we want to arrive at. He also says, untouched by the faults of seeing contradictions in relation to the views of the Sutra and Vajrayana, you will realize unmistakably the mind of the Buddha, which is liberated from the imputations created by the minds of ordinary individuals. Okay. Yes. Yeah, I know. So, so you just said there wasn't non-duality without wisdom. Yes. So we are. This is the thing. We do. We're back and forth a bit between the need for asserting wisdom as the remedy for duality, and yet also the nature of wisdom is such that it is obviously empty of any characteristic. So there you go. Anyway, so so I think that's it as far as I can gather here. The next interlude is so beautiful. I think we'll start next time. Well, it'll be a little bit laid back next time. So we'll start with reading Milarepa's song. So kindly just read the rest of the book. Last interlude, meditation, action, and I think there's some concluding remarks. So thank you very much. Good. Good if it was useful. Thank you. By this positive action may all beings perfect the accumulation of merit and wisdom and attain the two supreme kayas which arise from merit and wisdom. Thank you.